I sold your mountain cabin. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. I was standing outside a small volunteer medical center in rural Costa Rica, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, when my stepfather's voice came through my phone sounding almost cheerful. "What did you say, Marcus?" He laughed. "The cabin, Pricilia, I sold it." My fingers tightened around the phone. That cabin wasn't some vacation property I'd forgotten about. My biological father had bought it shortly before he died. He'd repaired much of it with his own hands, and when it eventually became mine, it was one of the few tangible pieces of him I had left. Marcus knew that. "I had debts," he continued casually. "Serious ones. Your cabin was just sitting there while I had an actual emergency." "You mean your gambling debts?" His silence lasted half a second. Then he chuckled again. "Call them whatever you want. It's for the greater good, mine." He was enjoying this. Marcus had helped raise me after my father died, and for years he'd used that fact whenever he wanted something from me. I was 32 now, but somehow, in his mind, being my stepfather still gave him the right to decide what I owed him. I didn't argue. I asked one question. "You already received the money?" "Oh, absolutely." His confidence sharpened. "And before you start making threats, most of it's already gone. Debts paid, problem handled, so there's really nothing you can do." I looked past the clinic toward the green mountains in the distance. Marcus was waiting for me to explode. Instead, I said quietly, "Hope it works out." The line went silent. "What?" I said, "I hope it works out." "Pricilia, why are you acting like that?" I ended the call. My hand started trembling the moment the screen went dark. Not because I knew the cabin was gone. Because Marcus had finally done the one thing I'd spent months hoping he wouldn't be reckless enough to attempt. I sat on the bench outside the clinic and opened a secure folder on my phone. Inside were documents Marcus had never seen. I opened one. Read the filing date. Then read the ownership information twice. My heartbeat slowed. I didn't call Marcus back. Instead, I opened my email and typed my property attorney's name. Rachel Kim. My message contained 2 sentences. "Please verify the current recorded owner of the cabin. Don't contact Marcus yet." I hit send. Then I stared at Marcus's number on my screen. He believed he'd sold my father's cabin. He claimed someone had already paid him. And apparently, he'd already spent most of the money. But if the document sitting on my phone meant what I thought it meant, there was one enormous problem Marcus hadn't considered. If he had really completed a sale, what exactly had he sold? Rachel replied less than 20 minutes after I sent the email. "I've got it," she said when I answered her call. "But don't assume anything yet. I need to check the county filing and find out what documents Marcus used." "So you can't tell me whether he actually sold it?" "Not yet." That uncertainty bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Because Marcus hadn't suddenly become interested in my cabin. This had started months earlier. The last time he visited me there, I was repairing a loose cabinet hinge when he walked around the living room like an appraiser instead of family. "You know what I don't understand," he said. "What?" "Why you keep this place." I glanced at him, because I want to. Marcus looked through the window toward the mountains. "It's dead money, Pricilia. You could sell it and actually do something useful with the cash. My father bought this cabin." "I know. He worked on half of it himself." Marcus's jaw tightened. Then he said something I never forgot. "I raised you longer than he did." The screwdriver stopped in my hand. Marcus stared straight at me. There it was. The invisible bill he'd been presenting me for years. He helped raise me, therefore I owed him. His sacrifices mattered more than my boundaries. His financial problems deserved my solutions. I stood. "This cabin isn't for sale." Marcus gave a humorless smile. "Everything has a price." No, this doesn't. He left shortly afterward. But 2 weeks later, I walked into my home office and found him standing beside my desk with his phone pointed downward. What are you doing? He jerked around. Nothing. You were taking pictures. Insurance information, he said quickly. I wanted to check something for you. I didn't ask you to. Marcus slipped his phone into his pocket. Jesus, Pricilia, I'm trying to help. That night, after he left, I checked the papers on my desk. Property documents. Insurance records. Old information connected to the cabin. The next morning, I called Rachel. I didn't accuse Marcus of anything because I had no proof. I simply told her, I want to change how the property is structured. I don't want anyone being able to interfere with it while I'm abroad. Rachel handled it before I left for Costa Rica. Marcus never knew exactly what changed. Now, standing thousands of miles away, I wondered whether that decision had come just in time, or whether Marcus had somehow gotten around it. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. It was a photograph. He was sitting inside an expensive steakhouse with a glass raised toward the camera. Beside his plate was a bank transfer receipt. The amount made me sit upright. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Under the photograph, Marcus had written, "See, problem solved." My stomach dropped. Someone had actually paid him. This wasn't a drunken threat or some cruel attempt to scare me. Money had changed hands. Before I could respond, Rachel called again. Pricilia. Something in her voice made me stand. What did you find? I located the paperwork Marcus apparently used for the sale. And there was a pause. Your name is on it. I stopped breathing for a second. What do you mean, my name? I mean, there's a signature purporting to be yours. That's impossible. I never signed anything. I know. A notification appeared. Rachel had sent me the document. I opened it, scrolled down, and there it was. Pricilia Bennett. Written in a careful imitation of my handwriting. Someone had signed my name to the sale of my father's cabin. And I knew exactly who had done it. I flew home several days later without telling Marcus. I wanted to speak to Rachel first, see the paperwork myself, and understand exactly what he had done before he had a chance to invent another explanation. But Marcus had already started telling one. My aunt called while I was leaving the airport. Pricilia, I heard what you did for Marcus. I stopped beside my suitcase. What exactly did you hear? That you sold the cabin to help him through his financial problems. He said you finally understood everything he'd done for you. I closed my eyes. Marcus hadn't just taken the money. He was turning the betrayal into a story about my generosity. By the time I learned the family was having lunch at my mother's house, I knew exactly where I needed to go. I walked through the dining room doorway while Marcus was speaking. Pricilia understood I was going through a temporary financial crisis, he was saying. She wanted to give something back. Then he saw me. The table went silent. Marcus recovered quickly. There she is. He stood and smiled. I was just telling everyone how much I appreciate what you did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't mention the forged signature. I pulled out an empty chair and asked, who bought the cabin? His smile weakened. Why does that matter? Because I'd like his name. Marcus glanced around the table. Daniel Foster. How did Daniel buy property from you when you weren't the owner? I handled the transaction for you. You handled it for me. You were overseas. Someone needed to get things done. And Daniel believed you had permission. Marcus's face hardened. I had authorization. That was new. My signature on a sale document was bad enough. But Marcus hadn't merely forged paperwork. He had represented himself as my authorized agent. I stepped into the hallway and called Daniel. Less than an hour later, he arrived. He walked into the house, holding a folder. "Which one of you is Pricilia Bennett?" "I am." Daniel stared at me. "You authorized this sale?" "No." He turned toward Marcus. "You told me. She gave you authority to handle everything while she was abroad." "She did," Marcus snapped. "No, I didn't." Daniel opened his folder and pulled out a document. "This has her name on it." I looked at the page. It was supposedly an authorization letter from me giving Marcus permission to negotiate and complete the sale. I had never seen it before. Daniel's face changed. "I transferred the money because you told me everything was legitimate." Marcus pointed toward me. "She's angry. That's all this is. Pricilia, tell him the deal stands so we can move forward." Everyone at the table was watching me now. Normally, that would have been enough pressure to make me soften my words. Not anymore. I looked at Daniel. "Do not take possession of that cabin until my attorney finishes reviewing the records." Marcus slammed his palm against the table. "You can't reverse this. The money is already spent." I looked at him. "That might be your biggest problem." My phone rang. "Rachel." I answered immediately. "Tell me." Her first sentence changed everything. "Pricilia, nobody legally transferred your cabin." "What does that mean?" Daniel demanded. I put Rachel on speaker. Her voice filled the dining room. "It means the documents Marcus used don't match the official ownership records." Marcus pushed away from the table. "That's ridiculous." Rachel continued. "The authorization document is invalid, and Daniel's payment appears to have gone directly to Marcus. There was no legitimate closing process establishing a lawful transfer." Daniel slowly turned toward him. "You told me this was a private sale because Pricilia was overseas." "It was." "You told me you had authority to sell." "I did." Rachel cut in. "No, Marcus, you didn't." Daniel's face drained of color. He had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for a mountain cabin he might not legally own. Then his shock became anger. "Give me my money back." Marcus said nothing. Daniel stepped closer. "I said give me my money back." "I can't." The room went still. Daniel stared at him. "Why not?" Marcus looked at me as though I were somehow responsible for what he was about to admit. "The money's gone." "How much?" "Most of it." "Where?" Marcus rubbed his forehead. "I had debts." I folded my arms. "Gambling debts." He shot me a furious look. "Some private debts, overdue loans, credit cards, things that had to be handled." Daniel pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked. "Calling my attorney." That was when Marcus's entire attitude changed. The man who had laughed on the phone while telling me he'd sold my cabin disappeared. Later, he cornered me in the hallway. "Pricilia, listen to me." "No." "Just sign whatever Rachel needs you to sign." I stared at him. "You want me to approve the sale now?" "It fixes everything." "For you." "For this family," he snapped. "Do you understand what happens if you refuse? Daniel comes after me. Lawyers get involved, maybe police. Your mother gets dragged through this. Everyone suffers." There it was again. Marcus created the disaster. Then, somehow preventing the consequences became my responsibility. "You forged my signature." "I was desperate." "You fabricated authorization." "I knew you'd eventually understand." "I understand perfectly." His voice dropped. "You're going to destroy this family over a cabin." "No, Marcus. I'm refusing to destroy myself to protect you." I walked away. Rachel instructed me to preserve everything. His texts, the steakhouse photograph, the transfer receipt, every document and voicemail. Then I remembered something. My phone automatically saved voicemail messages. I found the recording from Costa Rica and handed it to Rachel. Marcus's own voice came through clearly. "I sold your mountain cabin to settle my gambling debts." Then his laugh. Marcus went pale. For the first time, he seemed to understand that his triumphant call wasn't just cruel. It was evidence. A hard knock sounded at the front door. Marcus looked toward it. "That'll be Daniel. Let me talk to him." But I didn't move. Rachel did. She opened the door. 2 investigators were standing behind her. Marcus stared at the 2 investigators standing behind Rachel. For once, he had nothing clever to say. One of them asked, "Marcus Bennett?" His eyes moved from them to me. "Pricilia," he whispered, "what did you do?" I didn't answer. Rachel stepped inside and placed a folder on the table. "This is where we stop pretending this was a family misunderstanding." Marcus sank into a chair. And finally, Rachel explained what had actually happened. Months earlier, after I caught Marcus photographing the property documents on my desk, I had gone to her office because I was worried he might try something while I was abroad. Rachel had advised me to change the cabin's ownership structure. So before I ever boarded that plane to Costa Rica, the mountain cabin had been legally transferred into Bennett Ridge Holdings, LLC ****. I was the sole person controlling that company. The transfer had been properly recorded. Marcus never knew. He had photographed old documents showing information connected to my previous ownership and assumed they were still enough to sell the property. They weren't. Marcus looked at Rachel. "So what are you saying?" Rachel didn't blink. "I'm saying you never sold Priscilia's cabin." His mouth opened slightly. Daniel, standing across the room, stared at him. Rachel continued. "You used outdated property information, a forged signature, and a fabricated authorization letter to convince Daniel that you could sell something you had no legal authority to transfer." Daniel's jaw tightened. "My money went to Marcus," Rachel said, "not through a legitimate closing process that transferred ownership to you." Marcus leaned forward. "But he paid for it. Paying you doesn't make you the owner." That sentence seemed to crush the last of Marcus's confidence. The county records still identified Bennett Ridge Holdings, LLC, as the cabin's legitimate owner. Daniel had never legally acquired it. I had never sold it. Marcus had taken hundreds of thousands of dollars for property he didn't own. Suddenly, my reaction in Costa Rica made sense. I hadn't said, "Hope it works out," because I didn't care. I'd said it because the moment Marcus claimed he had sold the cabin, I knew there was a serious possibility that whatever deal he had arranged was built entirely on documents that were no longer valid. Marcus looked at me. "Tell them this was a misunderstanding." I stared at him. "A misunderstanding?" "Yes, tell them I thought I had permission." Rachel reached toward my phone. I pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the room. "I sold your mountain cabin." Then came his laughter. "I had debts. And finally, it's for the greater good, mine." Nobody spoke when the recording ended. Marcus stared at the floor. I walked closer. "You knew what that cabin meant to me, and you gambled with it anyway." His face hardened again. "I raised you, Pricilia." There it was. Even now. I was there when your father wasn't. I paid bills. I took care of you. I sacrificed for you. My father was dead, Marcus. He flinched. You don't get to turn his death into an invoice. My mother looked down at the table. Marcus pointed toward me. "After everything I did, you owe me some loyalty." No. It was probably the simplest answer I had ever given him. And the hardest. You chose to help raise me. That did not give you ownership of me. It did not give you ownership of my money. And it definitely did not give you ownership of my father's cabin. Daniel cooperated fully with investigators and began pursuing recovery of the money he had transferred. The forged documents, the fake authorization, and Marcus's own recorded admission became part of the investigation into fraud and forgery. Marcus's remaining finances came under scrutiny as Daniel pursued repayment. The gambling debts Marcus believed he had solved were replaced by something much worse: legal bills, repayment demands, and the consequences of explaining exactly how he had obtained the money. The family learned the truth too. Marcus hadn't been rescued by a grateful daughter. I had never approved the sale. The story he had proudly told everyone collapsed. And so did the authority he had spent years building around himself. Eventually, Marcus asked me for money for an attorney. I refused. Then he wanted me to help repay Daniel. I refused again. Finally, he suggested the easiest solution would be for me to sell the cabin for real and use the money to clean everything up. I almost laughed. No. For the first time, Marcus had created a crisis that I wasn't going to absorb for him. Months later, I drove back into the mountains. The road curved through the trees until the cabin appeared ahead of me. Same wooden porch. Same stone chimney. Same view my father had loved. I walked to the front door and put my key into the lock. It turned. Inside, everything was exactly where I had left it. The cabin was still mine. Afterward, I strengthened every safeguard around the property and removed Marcus from every remaining point of financial access in my life. Our relationship ended. Not because of a cabin. Because he had finally proven that as long as I kept protecting him from consequences, he would keep treating my boundaries as obstacles. Standing on that porch, I finally understood something I should have learned years earlier. Keeping the peace and keeping a family together are not always the same thing. Sometimes peace only begins when you stop paying for someone else's chaos. Marcus called to brag that he had sold my father's cabin to pay his gambling debts. But in the end, the only thing he successfully gambled away was his place in my life.